The last thing you want to do is overcomplicate the game of fantasy football. Sometimes there are just glaring red flags surrounding players. Now, if you ignore those red flags and talk yourself into taking a player that you really don't want, you're going to be mother F bombing everything in your path because you knew better. Well, it's my job to limit those mother F bomb outbursts. So here are 10 players that I'm really not interested in drafting in 2025. Now, it's also my job to drop weekly bangers, so you better believe today's gonna be one. Because in today's show, I'm gonna talk about 10 players that I really just don't find myself drafting very much in 2025. After all the research throughout the offseason, they just haven't really fit into my draft plan. Now, no, this does not mean that these guys are going to suck, or that they're just gonna be all-out busts. These are just guys I don't find myself drafting very often. Maybe there's also other guys in similar spots that I just like more. Because you gotta remember, we don't hate players, we hate ADP. Now, if you want to tell ADP to suck it, you need to get yourself a draft guide. It's got rankings, cheat sheets, tier rankings, injury analysis, offensive line rankings, Kyle's dynamic running back rating, and so much more. Anything you need to dominate your draft in 2025 is right there. All you gotta do is head over to tfhdraftguide.com. There's links down below in the description. Now, for those of you that want one for free, there's a way to do that as well. All you gotta do is head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app. Create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then, all you gotta do is make your initial minimum deposit and enter a contest of your choice. It can be a best ball draft, it can be a player pick'em, it does not matter. Because once you complete that process, Underdog is covering the cost of your draft guide. Now, typically it takes us right around 24 hours or so to get the reports from Underdog. If you complete that process, I'm gonna hook you up. But now we dive into the 10 players that I'm really not interested in drafting, and the first one, probably gonna piss off a lot of people, but it's Puka Nacua, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, Puka's currently the wide receiver 7 being drafted in the late first round. So we had a huge year in 2023, and then a year that was less than expected due to injuries just last year. Puka last season only played in 11 games, but still had 1,036 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns. Now, over his last 10 games of the season, he only had less than 8 targets in one game. But I think that we can all agree that Cooper Kupp wasn't playing at a level high enough to really take volume away from Puka. Cooper Kupp himself only had 12 catches total over his final 5 games of the season. Well, that changes in 2025. Kupp is gone, and now Davante Adams has entered the offense. And whether you want to admit it or not, Davante Adams has a lot more to offer at this point than what we saw with Cooper Kupp last season. Adams still averaged over 10 targets per game last season, and if that happens again this year, Puka may have a hard time reaching that wide receiver 7 number. But what I really want to focus on more so is that potential for injury. One of the reasons so many people, myself included, love to watch Puka play football is because of how hard he plays. Dude is always fighting for extra yardage and putting his body on the line. That opens him up to injuries more so than those wide receivers that just get out of bounds and take less hits. Just in the last 2 seasons, he's had multiple knee injuries, an AC joint sprain, and an injury to his chest and ribs. We also have an aging quarterback and a team that will be able to run with success. They just paid Kyren Williams this offseason, and Matthew Stafford has missed a chunk of time with some back issues. Now, it sounds like Stafford should be good to go week 1. But if he takes a big sack, do we miss him for any point of the season? And if so, how much does that hurt Puka? So when we look at the red flags surrounding Puka, we got the injury concerns. How about the improved competition for targets with the addition of Davante Adams? We have strength in the running game. How about the health of Matthew Stafford being a red flag? And then also his draft day price. For a lot of people, he'll have to be taken inside the first round, and that's a huge commitment. Now, there are a few players that I prefer that are going after Puka in drafts right now. Guys like Nico Collins, Drake London, and a running back in Josh Jacobs. I feel like at this point of the draft, with that early round investment, I feel more confident in Nico, Drake, and Josh than I do with Puka at this point. Now, after Puka, I really don't find myself drafting Brian Thomas Jr. very often either. The current wide receiver 8 in the early second round, and this one, I kinda hope I'm wrong on. He is one of our better calls from just last season. Brian Thomas fell to a spot where he had potential for a huge year. Then he went out and had 87 catches for 1,282 yards and 10 touchdowns, finishing as the wide receiver 4 overall. Then we saw Christian Kirk leave for Houston and Evan Ingram leave for Denver, and all of the sudden, Brian Thomas Jr. was in line for like 200 targets. People were just throwing themselves onto the bandwagon. Well, then the NFL draft happened and Jacksonville moved up to get Travis Hunter. And they also brought in another potential big play wide receiver in Dyami Brown, and a lot of people aren't talking about him. But that matters. And remember, I'm the biggest Brian Thomas truther there is out there. You have to keep in mind that a lot of the success that Thomas had in 2024 actually came with Mac Jones at quarterback and not Trevor Lawrence. Thomas didn't have one game with Trevor Lawrence where he had at least 10 targets. And when you look at yardage, he only had one 100-yard game with Trevor Lawrence. Now, under Mac Jones, he had 6 games with 10-plus targets and 3 100-yard receiving games. But we also now have a new coaching staff. Liam Cohen will be an upgrade to the offensive play calling, but how much do they utilize the likes of Travis Hunter and Dyami Brown? Do they eat into those big plays that Brian Thomas just feasted on in 2024? Now, Thomas could go out and have a super solid year. 80 catches for 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns? That's great, but that makes him barely a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy football. So when we recap the red flags, we have improved competition for targets. How about past inconsistent quarterback play? We all expect Trevor Lawrence to take a step forward, but we really haven't seen it in quite some time. How about the potential reduction in big plays? If Hunter and Brown can eat into some of those big plays, that's just going to reduce the overall ceiling of Brian Thomas Jr. Sure, he'll still be serviceable. He's still going to be a solid wide receiver. But can he crack the top 8? It's going to be difficult. Which is really my last red flag, and that's just his price on draft day. He's going late first, early second in most drafts. Once again, there's just a few other players I prefer. And being that he's right here around Puka, it's some of the same guys. Drake London, Josh Jacobs, I would even go with Bucky Irving here. Now, I love Brian Thomas Jr., but there's just a few red flags that I don't think we should be ignoring. Now, how about after Brian Thomas, we go to Devon Achane, running back of the Miami Dolphins, currently the RB7 in the early second round. And I know this is going to not be enjoyable for a lot of people. Trust me, I know how explosive this guy is and how he has the potential to be the overall RB1 on a season. But going at running back 7, he needs to be in the area of 1,500 total yards and 12 touchdowns. Those aren't just some easy numbers to hit. Now, if you could tell me that him and Tua would be on the field for at least 15 to 16 games this season, then Devon Achane is on every single one of my fantasy football teams. But no one out there can honestly say that it's a safe bet that Tua stays healthy. And then, here we are in the preseason, and Devon Achane himself is dealing with a calf injury that could cause him to miss some time. Calf injuries are terrifying for running backs. They always have a high likelihood of popping back up at some point throughout the season. There's even been some rumors out there of Miami trading for Brian Robinson Jr. Now, if that happens, it'll be a huge hit to Devon Achane if he's on the field. But there's also the issue of consistency. Do you realize that Devon Achane had 6 games where he scored under 10 fantasy points last season? How about the fact that he scored over 40% of his season-long scoring in just 4 games last year? Now, a lot of people, myself included, didn't like the idea of large volume going the way of Devon Achane last season. It really boosted the injury risk too much, but he proved a lot of people wrong. And not only stayed pretty healthy, he racked up 281 touches. Will he get those kind of touches in 2025? We know the Dolphins love to split carries between running backs. Devon Achane will have to deal with second-year running back Jalen Wright and rookie Ollie Gordon, who is looking pretty good this offseason. Now, neither of those guys are going to unseat Devon Achane, but they are capable options that will get weekly touches. How about the offensive line? Well, they just lost 5-time Pro Bowl left tackle Taron Armstead, who just retired. But above all of that, we have to look at Tua and his health. Achane without Tua is a totally different fantasy asset. Over the last 2 seasons, De'Von Achane averages 17.8 fantasy points per game in which Tua plays. In games that Tua was hurt and did not play, De'Von Achane averaged 7.7 fantasy points per game. Is there anything that makes you feel confident that Tua is going to stay fully healthy? The guy is 1 concussion away from potential retirement and has missed 15 games since becoming the starter in Miami. Now, no doubt, De'Von Achane has the potential of being a top fantasy running back, but he's dependent heavily on his injury-riddled quarterback. And if we're being completely honest here, there are a lot more concerns surrounding the Dolphins' offense this season than there have been over the last couple of years. Something just feels off in Miami and really raises a red flag. So when we recap the red flags, we have to add team chemistry to this. How about personal injury concerns currently for De'Von Achane and that calf injury? We have injury concerns surrounding his quarterback, Tua, and then we also have a very expensive draft day price. Early second round ADP is a huge investment to your fantasy football team. There are other players that I would prefer drafting after Achane's going off the board. Guys like Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving, and even Chase Brown and Kyren Williams. Now, the next guy will be no surprise. It's A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, currently the wide receiver 10 in the second round. And when he's right, he's a league winner. Think 1,400-yard seasons and wide receiver 1 finishes. But in 2024, owning A.J. Brown felt like you were chasing a mirage. First, it was the minor nagging injuries. He missed multiple games in 2024, had a hamstring issue early on in the season, and knee injuries towards the end of the season. Every week, you were refreshing your injury report just praying that he was a full go. Then we have the issue with inconsistent targets. Even when he's healthy, Jalen Hurts spreads the ball around to guys like Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and now a whole lot of Saquon Barkley. Now, A.J. Brown has monster games, but they're more few and far between now. Brown scored 45% of his season-long scoring in just 4 games last year, and that's no fluke. He scored 45% of his season-long scoring in just 4 games in 2023 as well. And if you want to go back further, he scored 42% of his season-long scoring in just 4 games in 2022. Then we get to the point that the Eagles now have a heavy run approach. Philadelphia loves to lean on their ground game, with guys like Jalen Hurts rushing and Saquon Barkley's huge workload. That's going to cap A.J. Brown's ceiling some weeks. Now, no team in the NFL threw the ball less in 2024 than Philadelphia, and they had 30 attempts less than the team with the second fewest attempts, the Baltimore Ravens. And let's not forget, the Eagles won the Super Bowl with this strategy. It's not like they're going to be quick to change very much. Owning A.J. Brown means you have a potential wide receiver 1, but you also have wide receiver 3 floor games that absolutely burn you. It's a headache weekly. So let's recap the red flags. We have a low volume passing offense in Philadelphia. We have competition for targets. We have continual nagging injuries throughout the season. But then we have what I would consider the biggest red flag, the inconsistent scoring. Some other players that I would prefer that are being drafted after A.J. Brown, guys like Ladd McConkey. How about Chase Brown, Kyren Williams, James Cook, and even Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now, after A.J. Brown, we're going with Travis Kelce as well. He's the current tight end 5 overall, going in the 6th round. And I feel bad for all the people who are going to look at his 2024 targets and try to justify him being a discount at tight end 5. This is why it's important to look beyond just the surface stats. Because yes, 133 targets is elite level usage for a tight end. But what really led to that volume is what's really important to pay attention to. Rashee Rice missed games. Hollywood Brown missed games. Juju Smith-Schuster missed games. And at times, Kansas City didn't have very many healthy options on the field aside from Travis Kelce. But now we head into 2025, and Kansas City is going to have the likes of Hollywood Brown. They now have second-year wide receiver Xavier Worthy. Juju himself is still in the mix, and as of right now, it looks like we could have Rashee Rice for most of the season. Now, do you remember what Travis Kelce was doing when the majority of the pass catchers were healthy in 2024? Let me remind you, Travis Kelce had a combined 8 catches for 69 yards over the first 3 games of the season. But even despite Travis Kelce getting more looks due to injuries, he still had career lows in yards and touchdowns since becoming the starter in 2014. He also saw career lows in yards per reception and yards per target. For his career, he was averaging over 12 yards per reception. Last year, only 8.5. In fact, last year was the 3rd straight year that Travis Kelce saw a drop in production. He's going to be turning 36 this October. The original plan in 2024 was not to overwork Travis Kelce. Keep him healthy, keep him fresh, unleash him in the playoffs, and make a deep run. That's what they're going to try to do once again in 2025. So when we recap the red flags, we have the target competition that he didn't have for a large chunk of last season. We have his age, the declining production we've seen over the last few years, and then being overpriced just due to name value. A lot of people still see the name Travis Kelce, and they're willing to pay a higher price on draft day to get him. Now, if we look at other players that I would prefer drafting close to Travis Kelce and ADP, we got guys like Teteroa McMillan, George Pickens, Baker Mayfield, Calvin Ridley, and Aaron Jones. And there are a couple tight ends that I would definitely wait for instead of drafting Kelce in the 6th, guys like Evan Ingram in Denver and David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. Now, after Kelce, we go over to Zay Flowers in Baltimore, the current wide receiver 26 with a 5th round ADP. And this is what happens when you fade down the stretch of a season. Fantasy players just seem to forget you exist, because if you remember, through the first 9 weeks of 2024, Zay Flowers was the wide receiver 10 overall and had outscored guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. But then, from week 10 on, he was the wide receiver 48 and was outscored by guys like Kayshon Boutte, MVS, Nick Westbrook-Akine, and even his own teammate, Rashad Bateman. But now we get him at a little bit of a discount, right? Wide receiver 26 this year? Well, this offseason, Baltimore also added DeAndre Hopkins, but he isn't the same guy that he was a few years ago. The guy I'm more worried about out there is Rashad Bateman. Not that he's going to be some weekly 10-target guy, but we really saw Lamar look his way down the field. Down the stretch of 2024, Bateman ended up hauling in 9 touchdowns, and I'm sorry, but the big-time touchdown upside in this offense lies within Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, and Rashad Bateman. Flowers isn't going to be a huge red zone threat. To score a lot of fantasy points, he's going to need a lot of volume, but therein lies the problem. Baltimore isn't really known for its passing volume. They had the 2nd fewest pass attempts as a team in 2024. Then they also added DeAndre Hopkins. Could Zay Flowers make a small improvement this year? Sure. No doubt. I can see him right around 80 catches for 1,100 yards or so and 5 touchdowns. But that's 185 fantasy points and puts him right in the area of wide receiver 20 to 25. The guy may not be a bad draft pick, but when we're looking for overall upside, there's just other guys I would rather have. Now, when we summarize the red flags, we have a low volume passing offense, we have increased target competition, and we have a lack of red zone opportunities. Now, some of those guys going after him that I would prefer, guys like DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard, 2 of the last running backs that you can draft that are going to get decent volume in 2025. How about George Pickens, Calvin Ridley, or even Rome Odunze in Chicago? Which means we're through 6 guys. We have 4 more. And for the next 4 guys, it's going to be a lot more about common sense and not playing fantasy roulette when you don't have to. Now, the first guy is Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs, currently the wide receiver 25, still in the 5th round. Now, for him, it depends on the information that you have at the time of your draft. I love the potential fantasy production of Rashee Rice this year if he's on the field. But how much is he going to be on the field? How long is he going to be suspended for? 4 games? 6 games? 8 games? No one knows for sure at the time of this recording. Now, I have played this game so long, I can't tell you how many times I see players draft a guy like this and say, hey, I'm just stashing him for later on in the season. My guys, my girls, you gotta be in contention at the end of the year first. Don't tie up a roster spot for that long. Unless you play in some smaller league, it's just not worth it. But like I said, if he's on the field, he's one of my favorite fantasy wide receivers this season. We just don't know how long he's going to be on the field, and that in itself is a major red flag. Some guys that I would prefer at similar ADP, Teteroa McMillan, George Pickens, give me the rookie Travis Hunter, or maybe even the target hog this year in Cleveland in Jerry Jeudy. Now next up is Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. He's still currently the RB26, going in the 6th round. Drafting a running back that has a lingering foot issue with no immediate timetable is not a direction you want to go. Why draft a guy that you have to sit on for who knows how long, especially in these middle critical rounds? This is where we should be drafting league-winning players. Even if he does come back, is he 100% healthy? Do Nick Chubb and Dameon Pierce still get touches? There are just so many questions that I do not want to deal with him as a fantasy asset in 2025. It is a huge red flag knowing that there is an unknown timetable for return due to a foot injury for a running back. Players I prefer after him, guys like Aaron Jones, Caleb Johnson, Baker Mayfield, Bo Nix, and even Tyrone Tracy. Now after him, I'm not drafting Jordan Addison either. The current wide receiver 37 in the 7th round. Yes, the immediate issue is the upcoming 3-game suspension, but we also have the fact that there is a new quarterback in Minnesota. There are other targets that will command big volume in this offense. Guys like Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. Wide receiver is such a deep category in fantasy football. In my opinion, there is nothing that special about Jordan Addison that he is worth waiting for the first month of the season. The red flags have to be the 3-game suspension, the new quarterback that he's going to miss out on some chemistry with to start the season, and the overall depth at the wide receiver position during your fantasy drafts. Some guys that I would prefer, Stephon Diggs. How about a tight end in David Njoku? Jacoby Myers should see a ton of volume in Las Vegas this year. And then 2 of my favorite mid-round picks at wide receiver are sitting here as well. Guys like Ricky Pearsall in San Francisco and Emeka Egbuka of Tampa Bay. Now, last but not least, it's Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's the current wide receiver 40 with an 8th round ADP, and this one is a kick to the sack, if you know what I mean. I had Godwin as one of my must-have wide receivers last year. Dude started off so hot and then went down with an injury. Well, he's still coming off of that major injury, and he's still not 100% healthy. Not to mention, Tampa Bay is stacked with weapons with guys like Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, Cade Otton, and the double-headed backfield of Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Now, the doc has already been on this channel and said the likelihood of re-injury is high, and he may not be close to 100% healthy until October or November. With rookie Emeka Egbuka more than capable, that's going to allow the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to slowly ease back Chris Godwin. Do I want to hold a roster spot for the first 2 months of the season just to see if Godwin comes back healthy? Probably not. When we recap the red flags, we have the chance of re-injury, the competition for targets, and the fact that he's not even close to being healthy at the start of the season. Other guys that I would prefer at this point, I would even take a chance on Cooper Kupp at this point over Chris Godwin. Then we also have Ricky Pearsall. Matthew Golden in Green Bay is turning a lot of heads this offseason, and then once again, his teammate Emeka Egbuka. Now, like I said at the beginning of the show, this is not intended to say that these guys are going to suck or that they're just automatic busts. They just have some red flags surrounding them that I kind of want to avoid in 2025. Because I don't know about you, but there is nothing more irritating than drafting a player that you have some reservations about and then he ends up sucking. So in my opinion, if there's multiple red flags there, I'm just gonna pass on the guy.